everybody. Welcome to Season 2, Episode 13 of my Chronic Migraine Life. Today's topic comes via a family member who had a conversation with me the Saturday before Easter. He had called me because his 6-year-old son, my cousin, was suffering from bad migraines for about a week or so. And he had a lot of questions and wanted to know if I had any tips or helpful hints I could share with them. And it was the product of, this video is really the product of that conversation. We've spent all this time together, and really all I've talked about is, of course, my chronic migraine life, but about migraines in adults in general. And whether you know it or not, migraines in children and even babies is very common. So I wanted to talk a little bit about migraines in kids. Now, while I'm not a doctor or a qualified specialist, it is a disease that I know fairly well a lot about, and I did contact my neurologist and had a conversation with her. So, of course, I'm going to tell you some things that you can avoid, that you can help. What I learned from speaking with my neurologist is that the things that you do for children with migraines are a lot like the things that you do with adults, the way that you treat them, the way that you test them. So there's a lot to be done. Just because they're younger or have smaller immune systems, smaller bodies, doesn't mean that there's not help. And that, I thought, is the most important thing, and that's what we should start with. Of course, if your child is experiencing headaches beyond the little things we're going to talk about today, you need to contact your pediatrician. And also, if a pediatrician doesn't have enough information about it because it's not their specialty, I really, really urge you to find a pediatric neurologist. There are some pediatric neurologists that are migraine specialists. Of course, if you can find one of those, that's the best, or a headache specialist, I should say, that is the best possible resource. But a pediatric neurologist will be able to assist you and get you the kind of medication that you may need for your child if it's a problem that persists or, of course, gets worse. You know, there's a lot of different kinds of headaches, and the same amount of headache disorders that there are in adults, there are in children. And so that's first things first. But as I spoke to my cousin and I started to go through the things, I realized that there's lots of things that we can do, right? So migraines appear differently in different people, but if you're having pain here. Now, it's hard for me to explain to you in this capacity the difference between a migraine and a tension headache. But in terms of anatomy, tension headaches typically happen in the back of your head, right? So migraines are all in the front. It can mimic, I guess, the pain of a sinus infection. And while I was speaking to my cousin, he said that their pediatrician had assumed that that's what it was when they video chatted or whatever. But because I know better, because I've experienced migraines, a lot of the things he said resonated with me more than a sinus infection. I've had both, obviously. And so, you know, it's the sensitivity to light and sound and nausea when you have the headache. Many people, and even children, turns out, vomit and feel better from the pain. It's not always the case. I, for one, was never a person that dealt with nausea in terms of my migraines on a regular basis. You can see auras. It's sort of like a halo around whatever you're looking at as a light or something. I never really experienced that either. But these are all things that are possible. So what I wanted to really start with is the list of things that you can do to help your child or yourself deal with a very strong headache sensation. For me, as I was thinking back, of course, this would require a doctor intervention. The very, very, very beginning, there are a lot of things that can cause headaches. I don't want to say diseases or illnesses, but just random things that you can take care of. For instance, I learned that I had very low levels of B12 in my body. And taking a daily supplement was able to rectify that. And maybe that was a piece of my puzzle that needed to be fixed. Getting your thyroid checked is another piece of the puzzle. And for me, was also, I have hypothyroidism, so I needed to treat that. Low levels of magnesium can also contribute to headaches. Adults and children, same thing. I used to take a magnesium supplement in the beginning, but it was very hard on my stomach, so I stopped. But eating magnesium-rich foods like spinach and all your green vegetables, and of course you can just Google what's best, what has magnesium in it naturally, helps a great deal. The other thing is to stay incredibly hydrated. Now, kids, I'm sure, are not drinking coffee or red wine, but if they're drinking soda, if they're drinking iced teas, a lot of sugary stuff, if they're not drinking enough water or water with electrolytes in it. So all those waters out there that have that is extra important to keep on hand. Even maybe some Pedialyte or Gatorades or whatever mixed with water is a good way to make sure that the kids are staying hydrated. All very simple things. I actually wrote down the list because I was sort of afraid that I would forget it, even though I hate reading off a list. So the hydrated, that's all important. Sunglasses. So if they're out in the sun, even if they're not experiencing a headache, this is sort of just a daily checklist. Very important, because I always find that sun aggravates my eyes and it aggravates the migraine brain. And that's ultimately what we're talking about. Keeping our migraine brains happy. Children, same as adults, are usually migraine brains need to be on a schedule. And while a child might have a more rigorous schedule or less than an adult, it's very important. Migraine brains want to eat at the same time. They want to sleep at the same time. So it's very important that as best you can, you keep your kid going to bed at the same time, maybe waking up at the same time, eating at the same time, maybe having small meals throughout the day instead of large meals. Sometimes blood sugar and blood pressure dropping tend to trigger these things. The most important thing that you can do is keep a diary for your child. It's the same advice they would give an adult. What were they doing when they got the migraine attack? Was it the weather? Was it raining? Were they overtired? Had they missed a meal? Were they, whatever it was. So just keep a list. It's a very simple checklist. I used to do date, time, what I was doing when I noticed my headache, what kind of pain I was experiencing. Was it a sharp pain? Did it come on all of a sudden? Was it a gradual thing? Did I feel nauseous first? Smell and sound and sight are very important in diagnosing migraine illnesses, and also sometimes in anticipating an attack. I know this is going to be sort of hard, but you have to give your kids the language and teach them how to explain what they're feeling to you. What dizziness is, if you feel blurry vision, if you're smelling something very potent and pungent that's no one else is smelling in the room, these could all be signs. Migraines are sort of tricky because it's a neurological disorder that I think people forget what a real neurological disorder does. And that really affects all of your nerve endings. For me, I didn't always have to have the pain in my head to know that an attack was either coming on or that my brain was aggravated. I felt pain in my teeth, severe pain in my teeth, that I thought I needed a root canal. And there was actually nothing wrong. I've gone to the dentist. I used to have a chunk in my right thigh, just a spot where it would just go numb for days, it felt like, and hurt and ache and be weird. My hands would turn bright red and burn for no real reason. Sensitivity to being touched. I felt like my hair actually hurt, but it was really the nerve endings in my scalp, So to be conscious, if your child is a female, if she has ponytails, if they're too tight, if they're too high, if they're been in there too long, or clips or headbands, things like that to maybe avoid. Those are all good things. Even earrings, anything that can pull on you when you have extra sensitivity, that's important to avoid. Something I really find helpful, I have an aversion to smells, not as much as I used to. I have a lavender roll-on, like essential oil. I could put it on my wrist or put it under my nose. Breathing it in and out is also very calming, but also disrupts whatever odor is bothering you. Also, peppermint sprays, essential oils are really nice to have around. If in terms of cleaning products have a very hard chemical smell, and I can't stand that. If you have kids, you probably aren't cleaning with ones that have ammonia smells in them, but in case, a really great tip that I read somewhere, I wish I remembered where, is mix a combination of 1 part white vinegar and 3 parts water in a spray bottle and spray that around as air freshener, as it's not really a disinfectant, but as a cleaning tool agent. And I really find that really helps. If there's a really bad food odor in my house or just whatever, even just putting a little bit of that combination in a bowl and leaving it on the table or in the kitchen really helps suck up the aroma in the air. And that is a great tip. If you have a lot of pain in your head, sometimes you want ice. My mother is always asking me if I want an ice pack, and I appreciate that a great deal, but sometimes they're too heavy and it actually hurts worse. In the description of this video, I'm going to put some links to some of my favorite products that we're talking about now that you can find on Amazon. It's super easy just to have handy. I'm also going to include a link to my blog about migraines in children and even in animals that I had posted a long time ago. So you can check out all that resource there. I've recently just found an ice pack that, it goes around your head, but isn't heavy. And it actually is like a cloth kind of material. So it's not those ones that like drip down your face or get hot real quick or anything like that. So I advise that is really helpful. I also have these patches, and I talked a lot about this stuff on my Tools of the Trade video in Season 1, Episode 15. But I'm going to reiterate it here again anyway. They're Kool patches, and I did some research over the weekend, and they actually make them available for children. They're these little patches. It sort of looks like a bandage, but it's not. It's a little white patch, and you put it on your forehead, I guess, or wherever you feel it, maybe the back of your neck, if you want some relief there. And you peel it off, and it's like a gel. It looks like a little piece of blue gel, a little rectangle. And it really keeps you cool, and I find for me alleviates some pain. And so that's a great tip to share also. I always carry snacks and extra drinks for myself when I'm out and about. For your migraine child, you might want to do the same thing. When we're talking about things to avoid, we really, really need to avoid sodium and nitrates, for me. Now, when you're keeping your diary, you'll note that if your child, eats a lot of chocolate, let's say, for instance, and they get a headache every time they eat the chocolate, you'll be able to see the pattern develop. Then you know, for instance, that that's affecting them. But it doesn't have to be chocolate, and it doesn't have to be sodium either. It can be whatever it is. It could be strawberries. It could be anything. It doesn't mean that you have an allergy to it. It means that it's a migraine trigger. So it's important to keep that diary. For me, I went through all of that, and it wasn't really food exactly. It wasn't caffeine. It wasn't really chocolate. I don't eat a whole lot of chocolate. But sodium. And sodium hides in places that we don't expect it to. When you start reading labels on a real level, like drinks, I didn't realize there was sodium in iced teas that were pre-made, that weren't, made at home with a tea bag. Like anything packaged, you have to be aware of the salt. Cereals, anything like that a child might be eating or that you might be eating. Nitrates predominantly are in like salami, bacon, hot dogs, which is a big thing for kids. There's a ton of sodium in prepackaged mac and cheese. It's always better if you can to make it yourself so you can control what's in there. Pickles have a ton of salt. Olives, anything in a jar or can that's preserved is your enemy. So really be aware of that kind of stuff. Depending on the toys and the age that they're at, the bright lights and the sounds might be a problem that they're not even realizing. So to be aware of that. And the ponytails we already talked about. So those are things that you can do on a daily basis. And, if your kid's having a lot of pain, good anti-inflammatories are over the counter as well. Naproxen is something that used to only be able to get by prescription. But I've seen it in Target over the counter, and even for children's dosage. Naproxen is good because it's half ibuprofen and half anti-inflammatory. Anti-inflammatories are really good at cutting down the pressurized feeling in your head and that helps a lot. To this day, I sometimes take an naproxen, but I have a prescription for this other anti-inflammatory that works really well for me. And so if you need that, that's another thing that a pediatric neurologist would really be able to assist with, things like that. So don't be afraid of going to the doctor because you're afraid that the kid's going to be put on pain meds. However, there are pain medications specifically for children with migraines and other headache diseases. So there is hope, and there's a lot of help out there. So I really want to make sure that that is conveyed. The other thing that is actually more common in children than adults when I'm talking about migraines, I think I've experienced it once, but I wasn't really sure, is abdominal migraines. So it's sort of an intense, I don't want to say stabbing pain, but it's a kind of pain where it's not that you're getting a stomach ache, you're not going to be going to the bathroom or throwing up, or it's not cramping pain, it's searing pain, maybe that's the word. And it can be anywhere in the stomach, but it is more common in children. I don't know why. Maybe we have a lot of nerve endings in the stomach. And so if in the course of keeping your chart that you realize that that's happening to your kid, then maybe you can let your doctor know. There are a lot of other things that once you start looking at a pattern, it's really until you keep that diary that you notice anything about your own illness. And because I kept such an extensive diary, I'm talking time of day, frequency, what you did that made it better, what you did that made it worse. All of those kinds of things that you really learn about it. Frequency in urination, or going to the bathroom, or being thirsty, or being hungry for a specific random kind of thing. Cravings. There are all these other things that can be attributed to having a migraine brain and either getting a migraine attack or coming off of it. The other thing is fatigue. Fatigue after an attack especially is very common. And so if your child has been in a lot of pain, you might want to limit their activity and keep track of how much they're resting. If they're not getting a lot of sleep, really good quality sleep, you're setting yourself up for migraine trouble. The other thing that we need to talk about, and it's an unpleasant topic, again, it's something you never want to think about, especially when you think of someone so little and being in so much pain. But it's the lesson that my cousin taught me, and I want to be able to share that message with you guys now. My cousin did, I believe, suffered from migraines, but his had an underlying cause. He's suffering from brain cancer, and he's going through treatment, and he's going to be amazing because he has the love and support of his family and the most brilliant doctors, and is such a strong, spirited little boy. He's going to be fine. I'm confident of that. But the reason I'm sharing that part of the story is if all of the things we're talking about escalate, and it's rare, but it happens. If it escalates and you know your kid, if they're vomiting nonstop, if the pain is just not breaking, it could still just be a migraine, but you need to get checked out. I urge you to go to the emergency room, not urgent care, because they can do an MRI, a CAT scan to rule out any other things. And no matter whether something drastically happens or the migraines just aren't breaking anyway, a video call with a pediatric neurologist will be able to ask you questions to rule out what they think if you need emergency care or not. Migraines with children, especially when they don't break, it's the same as an adult. You're at risk for stroke, you're at risk for all these other things. So it's not only just to rule out, God forbid, something else being wrong, it's to also know to get to the migraine before it does any other damage. And so don't always have to have that fear in the back of your mind that it could be something worse, but you need to know. Information is always more powerful when you have it, even if it's hard to swallow. Even if it is just a migraine, and having to think of that pain in such a small body breaks my heart. But there's help, and there are things that you can do and be diligent about it and vigorous about it. And that's super important. So I want everyone out there to really be mindful and do the things that they can do to help anyone around them that's suffering, big or small. And I'm going to ask you out there to say a little prayer for my cousin, that he has the strength and the love that he needs to get through this. And I know that he will, and he'll come out better than ever. And I hope that there someday is a cure for these terrible diseases. And migraines, they don't get a lot of research. They don't get a lot of funding. So my two big takeaways here are always get the help that you need. And if you're in the position to donate, the great causes are the National Institute of Health, the National Institute of Headaches, and the American Migraine Association, so that they can lobby Congress so that they can get the money that they need to do the proper research and just create the drugs that do the least amount of damage to our bodies but help us in the greatest way possible. So stay well out there, and hopefully no one out there is having a migraine life today.